Anita, you want to kick it off, or you want me to say the first word?
Sure, I'll get us started.
Okay.
Yes, so I'm really excited that we are getting the working groups underway. So thank you all for spending the time to have this meeting this afternoon. I just want to mention two things to set the stage. One is, and I recognize that I have been having internet connection problems. So I hope you can still hear me, even if there's a video problem. The public really cares and is anxious to see what this task force does. And I judge that not only by the media interest, the number of media outlets who have wanted to have more information about the task force work, but also just every public event that I've spoken at since this task force was created. People only want to talk about this. I offer to talk about the Supreme Court, they're not interested. They want to know, what is the task force up to? What are we going to do? So I think you should recognize that there's really a lot of public interest in this work. And the second point I want to make is a recognition of the difficulty of our task. That historically there have been many commissions and a task force appointed in these circumstances, and often while the members in earnest do great work, the question of whether there are ultimately structural changes that result in different outcomes, that has been a frequent an event. And so I know that we have pulled together the right individuals, and I really encourage you to participate wholeheartedly, knowing that what we're trying to do is not easy, but we have the right people, and we really have a moment in history where we can make a difference. So that's what I wanted to leave you with. And as your co-chair and I will be here as a resource to you. You are the voting members of the working group, and this is really for you to do the work. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. Yeah, we're really excited because this is where the rubber meets the road. It's the work of the working groups. Part of what y'all will be doing today is trying to get a sense of what the scope of your work can be. And I think what you'll find is that even though you're one of 4 working groups, it's a very awesome set of issues that you're going to have to wrestle with. And what I want you to do is to just encourage you to go with persistence so that we're making constant progress, but also recognize that some of these issues are going to be really tough. Even if you all agree on the goal, how to get to that goal endpoint, you may have differing views. And so if you need to take some time to get the information, to hear from experts, to get data as you wrestle with these issues, just know you have that time. Just keep at the work. If there are other issues where there's widespread agreement very early and that you know that this is something that you all agree on, then feel free to make those recommendations on a rolling basis to the task force in much the same way that we as a task force did in our second meeting to the governor and the Supreme Court. So I wish you all the best as you continue to wrestle with these issues. And as Anita said, we'll try to participate. You know, we may chime in if we have ideas, but this is your working group, and y'all are under excellent leadership, and look forward to seeing what you all accomplish together. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you to our co-chairs. And now I think we'll just move to Michael. Hey, you want to talk a little bit about norms?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. And we are really excited to be here to facilitate this process with you all. It's really important work that we're doing for our community and our state. So we wanted to, and you were a part of the task force, the second large task force meeting. We wanted to make sure that everyone is here to share their expertise and gets an opportunity to share openly and honestly and from their perspective, and feels that they can do that without compromise. And so before we dive into doing a work group business, we like to start off by establishing norms and thinking about, I'd like everybody to have an opportunity to share with the rest of the group what they feel they need in order to be able to share their perspective, their expertise, their concerns, questions they might have, with honesty and openness. And so if you can think back to a time where, you know, you were in a group and the process went smoothly, you felt like you were heard, you felt like you belonged, you didn't feel like you were an outsider, and think about what sorts of things were present in that sort of situation. And I'd like you to think about what you would like for this group to embody in order to maintain that sort of progress and that sort of process during the time that we have together in the working groups. And I'd like to begin because we're all in different spaces in the Zoom. I'm going to just call names and for now, for formalities, I might say Mr. or Ms. or something like this, but if you prefer that you be referred to as your first name or something like this, please just share that with the rest of the group so that we all know how you would like to be addressed during the session. So I'm going to start with the first person I see on my grid, which is Pamela Best. Sorry, I know. I was like, you didn't know you were first on my screen, but I'm sorry, you are.
I'm just lurking here. I work with Representative Maury.
Oh yes, that's right. Okay, well, let's start with Representative Maury, Marcia.
Please, yes, first name, Marcia. That's great.
You got it.
What would you like me to say?
Oh, what would you need? What do you need to make sure that you feel like you can share? You probably don't need much of anything to make sure you can share openly, but I just want to make sure that we honor what you feel the group should keep in mind while we work together to make sure that we have a communal space for folks to share openly and honestly about how they feel moving forward.
Well, I think we have a phenomenal group that everyone has real expertise in this area with our court system, and we come from different perspectives. Having a group of 5, I think we all will have our voices heard and bring up good ideas. So I feel great about it, and I'm really looking forward to being one of 5 and really addressing the issues that are coming before us and getting through them all.
Awesome. Thank you. Ronnie Smith, how about you? What would you like to see? What do you need to make sure that you can share open and honestly, share your perspective without compromise?
Thank you, sir. Well, first of all, I want to say hello to everybody. I'm known, my mother named me Ronnie, my mother and father, so you can call me Ronnie also.
Yes, sir.
I like that. And the biggest thing with me to be part of this group and be very helpful and productive, I think it's very important that we know exactly really what we want to, what the expectations are when we come into these meetings, really totally know what the expectations are. And as was said earlier, that, you know, there's a lot of experts out there, and by knowing what the expectations are, we can have a tendency to do some research on our own and have much meaningful conversations. So that's I just want to know, you know, be prepared. I want to be prepared to be productive and provide whatever information possible to be part of the group and actively a part of this group. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Woodall.
No, thank you. I'm happy to be a part of this group. And for me, having served on lots of different committees and task force, I think it's a real practical thing for me. I never feel that I can express my opinions and beliefs, but I think good facilitation A good facilitator is always important to allow everyone to be heard and to keep us moving in the right direction. I know we all play a role in that. And I just encourage is the way you reach a goal.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mushtaba?
Hey, Michael, thank you so much again facilitating. Good afternoon, everyone. Look, I'm excited about this work. At the end of the day, I think we need much needed reforms, and I would hope and agree and believe that a lot of the folks that are appointed to this task force, or all of us, believe in that fundamental work that needs to get done. So I'm just excited to get to know the folks on this wonderful working group. I've heard a little bit about you, read a little bit about you, and of course, got to hear from you in our past 2 meetings. So really just looking forward to sharing our ideas and thoughts so we can actually bring a lot of these things to fruition. And the reality as far as comfort level, I mean, the thing is, we've got to, as a group of people, as leaders in our community, we really have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable at times in order to get the jobs done. So looking forward to the conversation, and thank you so much for letting me be here with you.
Thank you. Tara Callahan.
Hi, Michael. Thanks so much for facilitating. Great to see you all. I think that, you know, when before the group was formed, both Justice Earle's office and Attorney General Stein's office reached out to me and asked for recommendations for conservatives that would be appropriate on this task force, because of the commitment by both the co-chairs and the governor to really make recommendations that have broad bipartisan support, that have cross-sector support. And that's, you know, really, if we're just talking to a choir, preaching to a choir, we're not likely to see real change or have momentum behind that. And I think to Senator Mohammed's point and Jim Woodall, I think we really need to be able to disagree when we disagree, and you know, make sure that all of our perspectives, we're all here for a reason. And I hope that, you know, we can have those uncomfortable conversations when it's necessary, and then, you know, achieve the common goal that we're all here for.
Excuse me. Thank you so much for that. I hope I didn't miss anyone. If I did, please forgive me. I think we get through everyone. And so I'm going to capture some of what you all shared. We want open collaboration. Marsha said you want to be one of 5, right? Marsha's the chair, but we're all doing this together. Ronnie said we want clear goals and to come prepared, knowing what our expectations are, knowing what we need to do in between so that we can be prepared for these meetings. Good facilitation. Jim, we got you. Thank you for that. and thank you for embracing the facilitation as well. Also being comfortable being uncomfortable. You know, this will be a challenging session for sure. You know, we're doing something that's never been done before. And so with anything new, there will be some challenges in that sense. But I like to say to lean into discomfort with curiosity. If we keep asking questions, we'll seek solutions that everyone can hopefully be happy with, and that we can move things forward from. One of my favorite quotes is from Daryl Davis. And he says, when 2 enemies are speaking, they're not fighting. It is when dialogue ceases that the ground becomes fertile for violence. So as long as we are talking openly and honestly and able to be coming at this with compassion and with the focus that we are here to help people of color, but also the rest of North Carolina feel safe and welcome, and that this is their home, and that they will be treated fairly. I think that we will be on our way. So I appreciate you all for sharing your thoughts. I'm going to turn it back over to Marsha to give us some insight for the goals for this meeting, and then we'll turn it back over to Karen to do some more discussion about how we can move forward.
Thank you, Michael, and everyone. I appreciate the work we have ahead. And I think just my objective on this review our meeting goals is we have the issues that have been presented that, as the Attorney General said, we're not bound to, but I think these are 5 really good, broad-ranging systemic issues I do hope we have time to address. The pretrial release and the bail, the charging decisions by prosecutors, the juvenile justice issues, the school to prison pipeline, racial equity training for all court personnel, and the decriminalization or lessening of the criminal penalties. That's a lot to take on. And all those broad issues have sub-issues that I know we want to address. What I kind of unilaterally today thought, what is the first issue that I think there could be good consensus? And that would be the racial equity training. And in a few minutes, we'll hear from John Rubin at the School of Government to talk a little bit about it. I am very open and would like input on how you would like meetings to go, what topics or presenters we would like to have or listen to, or if we just need time for the 5 of us to discuss these issues with our facilitators. The only other thing I want to add is I have gone through the public comment section. We had about, I think, 48 speakers when we had our public comments. I want those comments to always be in front of us. Some of the comments are within these categories, but they go a little bit deeper and a little bit further. And we have things, the most popular that this group should address. We had several saying we have to legalize marijuana. I mean, that's going to raise a lot of eyebrows. A lot were on pretrial, getting rid of mandatory minimums. I know Jim Woodall is interested in online adjudications and the U plea. Collateral consequences, and especially at the beginning of misdemeanor charges or adjudications. Pay attention to Hispanics and Latinos also came up that we haven't really addressed. A lot on pretrial and a stronger public defender system. So in whatever way we can do it, I hope we just stay very alert to how the public is voicing their concerns, and we address some of those issues. So we have a lot on our plate. Just really happy to be here. Want to be open, available, and share in collaboration with this work group. Thank you.
Karen, you're muted.
Thank you. I'll try this all over again. Marcia, thank you for setting this up very well for this next piece, because what we want to do is we want to hear from our task force members, the working group members. Marcia just mentioned, what our public is saying that they really want to see happening. And so what we want to do is spend just a little bit of time right now for you sharing what it is that, as a result of your participation on this particular task force and work group, what is it that you truly hope that we accomplish, or you truly hope that we address? So when you think about, one of the reasons that, a driver for your participation on this. So what are the 1 to the 2 to 3 things that, and it may well be some that Marcia mentioned when she was talking about from the public comments, but still using this time for us to hear. And I know that this question has been asked before. It was asked before in the larger group, but this is time right now for us to get a little bit more of a laser focus on what is it that we want as a part of this particular task force. So usually what I do is I say, people, please talk as the Spirit moves you. But if the Spirit doesn't move you, I'll call on you. You've got the choice. So, Spirit. All right, Mushaba.
This is Ronnie. This is Ronnie. May I speak?
Please.
Okay. I didn't cut across anyone, did I?
No, you're fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay. One of the areas that I'm really very much concerned with is the juvenile justice system issues. And after listening to the presentation that was given on the draft as far as a school to prison pipeline, that really opened my eyes. I had some thoughts on it, but I was not aware of the statistics on it, and that particular area there really caught my interest, and I really want us to spend some time on that if possible. I'm very concerned about that.
Okay. Well, then. Someone else.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess I'll jump. To keep this going. What I want to see are meaningful changes and systemic changes to address the racial equity issues. And I would say, the top three are bail and pretrial, that we have to look at those issues. We have to make sure people aren't being held because of poverty, and they have access to counsel for bail hearing, and that they are heard before a judge, not sitting 30 days waiting for a police officer's court date. So I think that is one of our big ones that's already been mentioned. The juvenile justice issue, thank you, Ronnie. I worked on Governor Hunt's task force to change our laws, but to keep kids out of the system. It used to be get them in the system to get them help, but to do better. So I'm really happy we're looking into that. And then I think, the expertise that Jimmy Woodall will have with the prosecutor's role and the overcharging, or how do we look at city ordinances and make sure people aren't criminalized because of solicitation for alms, or what we call begging, or hitchhiking, and city ordinances all over this state. There are hundreds of them that we need to look at. Should we really criminalize people for violating a city ordinance? We've already addressed the ability to pay fines and fees, but I think we need to probably fine tune it. I remember Judge Thornburg said, is this now mandatory? And so I think we need to answer some questions on what I think was a great recommendation that came out of our first meeting. Those are my hopes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
I'll follow up from there. My name is Jim Woodall. I'm the DA in Chatham and Orange counties, and some people who've known me a long time call me Jimmy, and so that's okay. I think one of the things I believe is, I think there can be some, and I guess these are systemic changes, but almost elemental changes to the criminal justice system that can have some significant, wide-ranging impacts, and I don't think that they're all so difficult to achieve. Marcia has already touched on one that I really think is important, and that's looking at charging decisions and decriminalizing things. There are so many people who have contact with the criminal justice system, and the contacts over fairly minor offenses. And I think there are other ways to deal with those. They're not the things that grab headlines, but I think they're what contribute to filling up our courtrooms every day. I think the racial equity training, I've done racial equity training, and I just think it's eye-opening, and that I think more than just prosecutors need that. Prosecutors probably have the most power in the criminal justice system, but I think judges and defense lawyers, public defenders need it too, because they also, their roles are very critical. And then I hope some way we can make sure we don't drown out the voices of the victims. I've had a couple of constituents reach out to me who have been crime victims. One, parents of a homicide victim, concerned because of something that happened over in Durham, a case that was an MAR allowed someone to be released from prison. Whether that was a good decision or a bad decision, they thought the way the victims were treated in that case was unfair and unfortunate. And so they've looked at this task force. They're advocates in our community for folks with mental health problems. And they've looked at our task force. And one of the things they've told me, and one of these people was a part of our public comment session the other day, they want everyone to know that victims should be heard too. And I believe that. They're often forgotten whenever we talk of reform in this way. So I just leave you with that we don't forget the victims as we move forward.
Thank you very much.
I'll go so you don't have to call on me, Karen.
Thank you.
So all the things that have been said previously are exactly why why I'm here and what I want to see. But I read an article in the Atlantic on Friday about the reality of policing, that the broad majority of responses are to nonviolent things that really social workers should be responding to, and only like 4% are actual violent crimes. And it just occurs to me that, decriminalizing and really being thoughtful about what we make illegal is going to make such a tremendous difference in terms of just the initial contact with police. And if police are not, approaching people for selling loose cigarettes or, counterfeit like dollar bills, then these instances will hopefully be reduced just by the very nature of, sort of what is illegal and what they're actually approaching people for.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. I know that Mustafa had to step away. He had to have something to do with a constituent. So we will try to loop him back in to hear that. But thank you for expressing those things. And I think this is really important that we hear specifically from you about the things that you want as well. I mean, we do have the tasks in front of us in terms of what's been that Marcia's already talked about, that we've been tasked for number 3. And when we look at the things that you've already talked about, they're very much aligned. So that is very good. So that I think that we've got a very good start for where we want to be, again, considering what our constituents want us to do as well. So we're going to move on right now. And
Karen,
yeah.
Even though I'm staff, I just wanted to introduce myself briefly. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalia Botea. I'm a policy advisor with the governor's office, and I'm serving a dual role here because I'm also the staff lead for this particular working group. So I'm going to be helping Representative Maury with any logistics. And while I typically won't be inserting any opinions, I just did want to add and kind of touch on what Mr. Woodall said, that it's not made explicit in the categories that we have, but I do think in charging decisions, it is going to be really important to look at the role of the prosecutor and the discretion that he or she has. And often that comes up in the context of over criminalization, which is incredibly important. But I do think it's worthwhile to look at and consider how victims of color are treated and the role that prosecutor discretion plays in that, including with hate crimes, but not necessarily limited to that, and how in some communities, law enforcement and prosecutors have looked the other way when victims are people of color. And I think that's important for us to consider as well.
Thanks, Natalia. Really appreciate that. Thank you for the intro and for the additional information. So what I want to do is turn it over right now to Ellen. Ellen, would you talk a little bit about the SharePoint? Tara had mentioned an article that she had seen, and so kind of talk about the SharePoint and how we can get those other resources to make sure everybody else has access.
Sure thing. All right, I'm going to share my screen with everybody. I think you all know me. My name is Ellen Spolar. I am the project manager for this task force. And I want to walk you through this SharePoint site that I sent to y'all via a link on Friday, but we will resend a link out to it right after this. Natalia will send you a sort of wrap up email, and it will be included in that email. I don't know how familiar everyone is with SharePoint. We use it a lot at DOJ. I think it's very helpful for organizing materials and thoughts and things like that. So we're hoping that this is sort of a one-stop shop for all task force members at this website. So when you get it, please feel free to bookmark it so you can easily access it. This is the home page. There are living documents in here. For example, I think right now we have the schedule in this particular folder. Things that just will be updated regularly should changes arise, and we want everyone to have access to those. Over here is a calendar that has all of the working group meetings, the times in which our data team meets, full task force meetings, things like that. So if you're ever curious about one place that's not sort of that, that document view, but instead a calendar view, you can always look here. And Zoom links for other working group meetings will be there. So you can always like dip into those as an attendee should you want to see what's going on in the other meetings. The page I really want to highlight for you guys is this working group tab that is over on the left-hand side. You click on that. Up will pop sort of a description of what we went over in that first meeting of what's associated with the work of a working group. And then you can see here that there are folders for each one of the working groups, along with a document that will house all of the questions or requests we have for data. And then sort of also that working group overview document, which I'll just show this to you guys really quickly, which just has the breakdown of all the working groups in it and then the different assignments and things like that, should you have any questions, again, about who's on these particular groups. Let me head back to this. What I really want to show you guys is your folder. So working group number 3. This looks the same in every working group folder. There's one for agendas. You will always be emailed these in advance of the meetings, but should you ever want to go back, they will all be located here. The same goes for meeting minutes, which your excellent administrative staff lead, Ashante Pretty, will be putting together for you guys after every meeting. They will be located in there. Again, a lot of work, a lot of moving parts. I think it will be helpful if all of that is in the same place for you guys. And then also resources, articles that come up that are related to your work. But where most of that work will be found is in this idea bank. And again, we will send you a link to all of this after the meeting. But this is a document that staff had put together. This is not encompassing of all the ideas that exist within each of your issue areas, but just some resources to get you guys started thinking about these issues. There are 3 different sections of this document. The first one is an overview section. The next one is research resources. And the last one is an implementation chart. So the overview section just has some ideas, again, very preliminary, that relate to the issues in the executive order that your working group is tasked with addressing. Just the plain language of those ideas is located in the overview section. And if you scroll down, each one of these ideas then has a more fulsome set of resources and example links that relate to each one of these ideas. Those resources are academic or investigative reporting, that kind of thing. And then also, again, examples of where that policy or idea might be enforced or just a proposal. We've also tried to flag if this particular idea was recommended by a major advocacy group or a commission that has already attempted to address some of these issues. Lastly, there is a chart at the bottom that is related to implementation. Sorry, it's quite long. That is just designed to help you guys as you move towards the process of thinking through how any of these ideas would be implemented. This chart is here just to help you think through that process. None of this is filled out. Again, it's just a tool for helping to organize your thoughts. We will send a link to the broader SharePoint page and then also this idea bank around after the meeting for you guys to explore. And please, please contact Natalia and Ashante should you have additional ideas that come up for you that you want us to prepare in a similar manner. We are around to help you.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Ellen about in relation to this incredible resource? Has everybody had a chance to access, or they've actually been in there already? Kind of, sort of, maybe, or no? All right, okay. Now you know. Now you have the opportunity.
Yeah.
And it is, and I have to say, I've been in there a couple of times, and it is an incredible resource. So kudos to staff for what you've already done and how else you're going to populate that. So Anyway, we have a guest speaker that's scheduled right now, and I'm going to ask Marcia if you would give the introduction.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, I'd be very happy to. As I mentioned, one of our topics that to address is racial equity training and for people in the court system. And I think I went to John Rubin, who I have known for many years at the School of Government. Professor Rubin is a very distinguished professor and has been working at the School of Government and has had some Z. Smith Reynolds funding for racial equity training. We had a good telephone discussion a few days ago, and I thought he would be a great person to kick off this issue and this topic, talk about what the School of Government has been doing, any proposals, and to listen to any questions. So really appreciate John for being here, and take it away.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can everybody hear me all right? Well, I appreciate your letting me join you today. I'm happy to see that education is one of your priorities. Obviously, it's something I believe in. I was in law practice for about 10 years, but since leaving practice, I've been at the School of Government for almost 30 years now as an educator in criminal law. And I think education is particularly important in the area of racial equity for you to be able to sustain the forward movement that you hope to have. And I'm going to try to give you a general roadmap of what kind of racial equity education I think would sustain your movement forward. Now, listening to the conversations from here and elsewhere, I may have a broader idea of what racial equity education means than people may typically have. So let me start with what we've been doing in this field and give you an idea of what's possible. So I think I can share my screen. All right, is that now sharing? So I run a program of public defense education, of defender education at the school. It's a broad educational program. We have a calendar of live events that used to be in person. Well, they are still in person, but they are online in person. And we run these throughout the year. And basically we've designed an education program that takes defenders through the various stages of their career. It covers various practice areas. And it's an integrated curriculum to address those needs of different practice areas and different stages. We also have recorded sessions, both from our in-person programs and from things we generate going into the studio that we think are helpful to people. So back in 2012, we began receiving feedback from the defenders that we served that they wanted more education around issues of race in the criminal justice system. And we began doing individual sessions at our training programs, but we found that once a year, 1 hour per program just didn't have the impact that we needed to have and that I think people were looking for. So we started with going to Z. Smith Reynolds, and we got a grant to basically study all the ways that race can work its way into the criminal justice system. So we have several reference manuals that we've created over the years, and one of them is specifically on raising issues of race in North Carolina criminal cases. So we have chapters on police investigation and how race may play a role there. We have chapters on selective prosecution and charging decisions and plea negotiations. Selection of the jury. And so we rolled this out in 2012. And we did a little bit of training on the topics in the manual to make people aware of it and to help people understand and implement the information. But again, we found that was really not enough to have an impact on everyday practice. So back to Z. Smith Reynolds we went. Are you able to see this still? And we launched the Racial Equity Network. And this is a training program and a network for defenders. And through an application process, 50 defenders, 50 defense attorneys, public defenders, assigned counsel signed up for a 2-year program of trainings every 3 months. So 6 to 7 trainings over the course of 2 years. We repeated that program in 2017 to 2019. 60 more defenders became part of the network. And our idea was to create leaders in the defense community around the state who were committed to advancing racial equity in the criminal justice system, with the idea that they would then convey what they've learned to others in the system. So why the strategy of defenders? Faculty at the school specialize in a particular area of law. We have several people working in criminal law, but then faculty work with specific groups and develop relationships with them. And the group that I work primarily with has been indigent defenders. So there was a natural connection there. But to be candid, we also didn't think the rest of the courts and the criminal justice community would be as receptive to the racial equity education we were offering. We were also concerned that we might have to water down the analysis, water down the conclusions that we were suggesting, the practices that we were recommending, because people were not ready to assess, frankly, the systemic problems that we have. I think we're at a moment where we can do more. And I think this task force is evidence of that. I'm not suggesting that everybody has to go through a 2-year training program with several trainings each year. That kind of intensive training may be a good idea for leaders within different parts of the courts and criminal justice system. But there's plenty more that I think you can do, that we all can do, that is not as intensive. So let me see if I can figure out another way to share. So it always helps me to have a framework. And this is my framework for racial equity education. And it's a pyramid, as you can see, of different components. And there's some overlap, but I think they have distinct qualities. Law and practice, I've got at the top of the pyramid because that's the business we're in. Although I confess a little bit of bias about putting law and practice at the top of the pyramid, since that's what I do. And that pyramid, or that part of the pyramid, we're really talking more than just training on the law itself, training on issues around race and the law. It's also important for people to understand how they actually put that law into practice as a judge, as a prosecutor, as a law enforcement officer, in a way that promotes racial equity. For example, we've done jury selection training for defense lawyers, and that includes how to raise issues around race-based challenges to jurors, the peremptory challenges of jurors that are racially discriminatory. We've done some of that training for prosecutors as well. We can do more for judges. Now, the basic law, there's a 3-step analysis for addressing race-based challenges. And we can go over that pretty quickly. But there's also the practical side of how a judge assesses challenges in court. There's that exercise of discretion. There's that understanding of why the challenge is being made and why it might be improper. It's been mentioned today that people are interested in bail reform, are interested in changing the procedures around bail. There will be a need to educate people on those changes, but there's also going to be a need for addressing the discretion that's involved in making bail decisions. The same with charging decisions. We've done a lot of training over the years on what charges may be appropriate for what crimes. But then there's that piece of how prosecutors, how law enforcement officers should exercise their discretion to charge. So that's the law and practice, very briefly, the law and practice piece. There's also this large component around leadership and management. And it's a foundation of all of the work that's done in the courts and the criminal justice system. What can leaders of organizations do to promote racial equity? What kind of training do they need to have the tools to lead their organizations to promote equity, to have the difficult conversations they need to have, to help them partner with others, to help them partner with members of the community, community groups, community leaders, to help establish coalitions and collaborations with other parts of the courts and criminal justice system. Those of you who work in it know it is a complicated system with lots of independent parts. And so having those conversations around, particularly around difficult issues, is something you have to learn how to do. Part of it's practice, but part of it is there are some skills. Management I see is a little bit different than leadership. Involves more the day-to-day running of an operation, hiring a diverse workforce, addressing discrimination within the workplace, having more difficult conversations with people. Administrative systems, we don't always think about it, but I'm sure the task force is going to be thinking about procedural changes. For example, data collection. My guess is there will be an emphasis on data collection. Well, to do an analysis of data, to disseminate that, there's going to need to be education on how to do that consistently and reliably. If jury pools are underrepresented, why are they underrepresented? How do we collect the data consistently and reliably to ensure there is not disproportionate representation on juries? So those are sort of the surrounding triangles. In the middle, on purpose, is diversity, equity, and inclusion education. I think this is what people often think about when they think about racial equity education. And it's an important area. It's purposely in the middle because it touches all three areas, while different personnel may receive different training on in the different triangles, lawyers and judges in the law and practice area, administrators in the administrative system area. Everybody who works in the system, their work is going to touch diversity, equity, and inclusion. Issues like implicit bias, cultural awareness, privilege and entitlement, and just more conversations, facilitated, structured conversations about race, because people's habits, their attitudes, their ways of thinking are important to the execution of all the other three components of the work. So let me see, I'm gonna stop. I think we've got, the pyramid is apparent. So how do we get started on this? For the school and myself, I can tell you we are trying to launch a racial equity education project, which I will direct and which will build on what we've done with the defense-based racial equity network. I forgot to show you all the agendas from our different trainings for the racial equity network to give you a sense of what we're doing, but you should be able to go back and look at those. And we're going to begin by offering education in those different components of the pyramid. It's going to include others who work at the School of Government in judicial education. Some of these people you may know. Shay Denning is our Judicial College Director who works with prosecutors. Jamie Markham works in the corrections area and probation. Jackie Green works in the juvenile justice area, and all of us are going to be involved in trying to do more racial equity education throughout the courts and criminal justice system. We don't expect to be the only source. And the education we do offer is undoubtedly going to involve collaboration with other organizations, other groups, depending on the topic and depending on the group. We're not going to launch this alone. And whether it's the school or other organizations that provide education, it's probably too early for me to tell you exactly what that education should look like. I could sketch things out. I could figure out a curriculum. I could figure out who good providers are, what could feasibly be delivered, how we might do it. But when we're talking about education for people in the field, it's a back and forth process. It's not undergrad education or graduate education where I, as a professor, get to decide what we're going to cover, and you're going to learn it whether you like it or not. When we're talking about people who are working in the field, professional educators might steer the ship, but we need to know the needs, the concerns, the problems of the people who are on the ship, the people who are traveling with us. And I think that's going to be particularly important to have lots of conversations as we figure out education about what people need, what their concerns are, and frankly, what the problems are in the system. The people we serve need to be part of the change we want to see happen. So sort of the general recommendation of the group is a robust commitment to education in all of the areas of the pyramid, diversity, equity, and inclusion being a very important part, but in all of the areas, and then work on, to the extent time permits, developing a plan for how to execute that commitment, beginning with conversations with the people that we're serving, people in the system and the people who are served by the system, members of the community. So I may have run over a bit. I tend to do that. So let me just close where I started. I think education is a way to sustain the way forward. I think about our manual. We realized we couldn't just publish it and sit back and wait for applause. We needed to implement it by getting out and training. And I think the same will be true for any recommendations you make. If your recommendations make it into law, great. But again, I don't think it's enough just to enact laws and sit back and wait for the applause. I think back to when I first started at the School of Government in the 1990s, domestic violence was an issue that I worked on. To put it very simply, it was just not being taken seriously enough by people in the system, by police, by prosecutors, by judges. I'm not trying to compare the specific issues. It's always dangerous to make comparisons and draw parallels because the issues are different. But from an educational standpoint, I learned about the importance of robust, ongoing education. I traveled the state with Joan Brannon. Some of you may have been around long enough to remember Joan. And we did training around the state for magistrates and police who were the front line handling complaints from victims. I helped develop standalone programs. I taught in other programs. I think it helped. Is there still resistance about the seriousness of domestic violence? Sure. I think there's still a lack of understanding, but I think things are better. Was the education we developed and we delivered, is that made all the difference? Of course not. But I think it helped sustain that forward movement. And I think your support of education can likely be a difference maker. So I will stop there. I'm happy to take questions. I was actually happy to take questions as I was speaking, but I'm happy to do so now and be part of the conversation if you'd like me to be.
Thank you very much, John. So I'd like to open it up to members of the working group to, if they have any questions for John based on what he shared in the presentation.
Yeah, I guess I can start. I will tell you, and others may have also included this on their survey, but as it's written on our issue sheet, the racial equity training was something I suggested in the survey. And I've done that training and I think it's really valuable. I know that the state bar is contemplating having a racial equity requirement in the future. Don't know what that'll look like. And I think that will be inadequate for what we need in the criminal justice system. And just my idea around this has been something similar to what John describes in his racial equity network for defenders, something that prosecutors, judges, and public defenders specifically, because they're all employed by the state, the criminal justice system, are required to do, and really robust training that goes on continuously as long as they're in those positions. So that is just my thought on this.
Thank you.
I guess I'll ask John. A few years ago, I went to the Greensboro Racial Equity Institute and was blown away. It was a 2-day, very comprehensive, intensive, but it changed my life. And all of our judges went to it. From your perspective, and each group is different, and each group does different trainings. School of Government does a lot with judges. The prosecutors do their own. What would optimum be? You said every third month for 2 years. What would you recommend would be optimum for a required racial equity training for magistrates, defense attorneys, judges, DAs, clerks, all the court actors?
I mean, it strikes me as necessary for everybody to have what I had in the center of my pyramid: diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is where I would roughly categorize the training you went to in Greensboro. Basically, really getting at your biases and raising your awareness. I'm not sure about 2 days, whether that is feasible, but I think that's a necessary education for everybody. Then I think we have to translate that into what people do day to day in the system. You know, how many of those biases creep into discretionary decisions they make, which is where biases can affect the outcome. So decisions about pretrial release, charging, jury selection, stops by police. And that's where I think additional education is going to be necessary to actually make that real on a day-to-day basis. So there are different strategies to get that done. I'm not sure I can say what's optimal. Information can be integrated into regular training for people in the courts group, in the courts and the criminal justice system. There can be standalone training opportunities for people that deal with specific issues. Boy, there's just a lot of ways. There's a lot of different ways of addressing it. But I think that centerpiece is important for everybody. Does that answer your question, Your Honor?
John, I'm aware of a group of folks in the state that are working on developing a video to be shown to jurors that explain implicit bias. And I guess they've requested of Chief Justice Beasley to mandate that this be shown before trials. I think she's going to recommend but not mandate. And I just wonder if you think that that sort of, you know, obviously just kind of helping jurors understand the ways in which they may have these notions that affect the way that they're processing information seems to be an important part of education. Would you see that as something consistent with these recommendations?
Absolutely, particularly since it emerged from our racial equity network. But I do think it's significant that the project attorney on the racial equity network, Emily Coward, has reached out, and there's now a working group to create an implicit bias video. And I do think that's important. And that's an interesting point, that the education is really for everybody who's involved in the system, including prospective jurors. That's a very good point.
So John, Professor Rubin, how are you? Nice to see you again. Hope you're doing well.
Good to see you.
For me, real quick, look, I think we can all agree that all of our public defenders and DAs and judges, they need to absolutely have some sort of training. But the thing is, as human beings, we're not fail-safe proof. We need that constant learning and growing. It's part of the reason why the state bar requires lawyers to do continuing legal education, for example. What are your thoughts about having consistent, periodic race equity training for these types of stakeholders, especially in our court system?
I think it makes sense. I think it makes absolute sense. I don't pretend to be the expert on issues around bias, implicit bias, and the way people react, but I think it's something that just requires ongoing work to be aware of it. And then again, as lawyers, judges, law enforcement, people who are doing this on a day-to-day basis, I think need to look at that work from that perspective and see how that perspective affects those day-to-day decisions. So that's where I see how racial equity education fits into the day-to-day responsibilities that people have. It's more than a general raising of awareness. It's how that awareness then plays into the specific things that people are doing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Just another follow-up real quick. Do you know if any other states are doing that type of continuing racial equity training in their states?
I began to do a little bit of searching. I think what we're doing with the Racial Equity Network is unique. There are some programs out there. I'm going to have to look into it further. And I think that would be part of the. I think that's part of the work. Is not to reinvent the wheel, but to see what practices are out there that we can borrow from and try to take what fits North Carolina.
I mean, I can just say from my personal experience, Representative Moore, I've done that 2-day training that you're talking about as well. And for me, I think whether you're public defenders or DAs, what have you, time goes by. You need those constant reminders that this is a perpetual problem in our society, and that we've got to do a better job of addressing it, because education is going to be the key, like Professor Rubin talked about. So I think that's something that hopefully our task force does take into account. Some sort of course, baseline mandatory training for everybody. I mean, we should do the bare minimum, but looking at continuing type of training like the state bar requires attorneys to do for continuing legal education. I mean, that racial equity component should perhaps potentially be a piece of it as well.
But I think that, I know that when I teach law, or how to pick a jury or how to cross-examine a witness, I'm pretty confident that when people take that back to their office, being trained lawyers, that they will apply it because that's what they've been trained to do. But the kinds of things we're talking about here, that's going to be different for people. And so that reinforcement, both through education and then through the leadership and management within their own offices, is going to be critical. And again, there we bring up education again about helping leaders and managers foster that environment within their offices. It's not instinctive or easy.
Could I just add one other point? I agree with the center, and we have to teach it and be consistent and go on and keep it in front of our eyes, but also hear it from those who have been affected by racial bias, to hear how it impacts families and individuals, and hear the real stories. I mean, we have seen the real stories in the news. Is why we've gathered. But to reach out across the state and hear from those who have been discriminated against, those whose lives have been changed forever because of racial prejudice and bias. So I hope that is part of hearing with the teaching.
I think it's important to include the communities that the courts and the criminal justice system serve, that they ought to be part of developing change, including the education that we provide.
Does anyone else have any questions for John?
I'd like to ask a question, not to preempt any working group member, but I'm just curious if you are aware of any studies that show the efficacy or the impact of doing the training, and I'm thinking about this both in the context of how do we monitor the results of a recommendation that this kind of training happening, and I was struck by the fact that you talked about the manual that you created in 2012. So we're now 8 years down the road. Is there any way to measure that as a result, there is less of a disparate impact on Black people in the criminal justice system in North Carolina because of that? Or, what can you point us to on that?
Justice Earls, that's a very good question. I would like to look into that further. I know that there are individual results in individual cases where these issues have been raised. People have been made aware of the possible impact of bias, and they've addressed them. But I can't point you at the moment to a measurement. I'd like to see if other states have done that.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
I have a question that I guess, at least in my mind, is related to the question that Justice Earls raised, which is, like, are these trainings most effective, not as like a one size fits all, but I guess what kind of thought have you given to kind of how to tailor the trainings to different groups? And I'm thinking of, like, even people within the same professional class are going to have very different perspectives around race, and does it make sense to bring them all together for the same type of training, or how do you kind of meet people where they are, because the messages might be very different based on their own personal background?
I think whenever you design training, you have to begin with communicating with the people that you're going to train. And that's why I was reluctant to say, oh, this is exactly what we ought to provide. But to sit down with people and as we say in the adult education world, do a needs assessment, find out who we're actually trying to serve. I think any kind of training we develop, though, needs to involve structured, facilitated conversations. So we have an opportunity to hear what people think, what concerns they're having, what problems they're having. Just getting up and telling people what they ought to do and how they do it doesn't necessarily bring out, as you say, where they are right now. And it's important to find out where they are and to provide them some training to help them move forward. We may have groups who are, there's lots of different ways of designing it. You can have public defenders or prosecutors alone. You can have them together to see where common ground is. You can, the school is going to be involved in a leadership institute for the police in the fall through the Justice Academy. And that will start to touch on these issues. There may also be education that also includes police and community members. So there's lots of different ways of reaching people, and it's a matter of how you design it. I realize that's not, it's not precise, but you know, it's sort of the general approach as we design education.
Can you give a brief description of what you're doing with the Justice Academy and who that audience is for, what the curriculum is?
It's a 3-week program on leadership. The School of Government is involved in a week of it. A former School of Government faculty member who now works for you, Jeff Welty, is involved in that. Jeff's been working on policing philosophy. And so that's going to touch on some of the issues we've been talking about here. What should we police? What is appropriately left to other services to help address? And so there's several people at the School of Government involved in that.
And that's for leadership within law enforcement?
Yes. And given how many law enforcement officers we have around the state, I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
And again, in terms of partnering, there are lots of partners out there, and they're already doing work. Community colleges, I think, are beginning to do more in this area in criminal justice education. So it's a matter of seeing who's doing what and figuring out where it makes sense to add.
John, may I ask a clarifying question for the group? You said the program is 3 weeks, and then you said 1 week with the School of Government. Is that, does each cohort do 1 week, or is it 3 weeks?
I'm not sure what changes they've made as a result of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I think when it was, so I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you.
Michael and all, we can follow up on that. We'll talk with Trevor Allen, Director of the Justice Academy, and get the information back to the group.
Thank you. Thank you.
Might be good for someone on the task force, on this working group, to do just what John recommended. Sorry, I've got an appointment. To do what John recommended and join or reach out to the community colleges to see if they've got any standard curriculum and for whom, and what does it entail, because that may be scalable if it's being widespread at this moment.
And I am happy to help with that if it would be helpful to the working group. I think it's certainly beneficial for me to learn more about what people are doing and how we could be most effective.
John, thanks a lot for coming. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure we will talk about where we are and get back with you.
Well, I hope that was helpful. I appreciate you giving me so much time at your first meeting. Do you mind if I stay on and listen to the conversation?
I'm fine with that. Is that okay with everybody else?
Or
no objections.
Or I may leave. I have a leave button down at the bottom.
You're fine.
So it sounds like from what I gather that folks seem to be enthusiastic or supportive of some sort of racial equity training for all members of the criminal justice system. Some either even if it's just sort of baseline training to get us started. I'd like to know what folks feel they need to gather more information on or need to learn more about, perhaps, in order to feel confident in moving forward with a recommendation like this for the rest of the task force to take into consideration.
Michael, let me just ask, unless someone really wants to add more information or detail, can I ask the task force members, is there any objection to putting forth a consensus issue that we do endorse racial equity training for the court system personnel, which includes the judges, the public defenders, the district attorneys? I would add the juvenile justice system and court staff, including clerks. And we will come back and try and flesh it out, but unless we need further discussion about that, would that be one item on our agenda we could have a vote on?
Representative Maury, I would just real quick also include our probation officers with DPS in that as well. I don't know if you had mentioned that or not.
Thank you. Absolutely. Any discussion?
I support that. I really enjoy the John providing us with that presentation. The School of Government is a great organization. We have, as elected leaders, we have the local elected leaders academy, which is normally consists of about 3 to 4 years. You know, it's all depending on the pace you take it, but you know, they put out a great product, and I'll say it's second to none around the country as I deal with commissioners around the country compared to the educational processes that they have in their state. And I believe that we could take this and just be able to blend it in with some of the programs and training that we already provide for, you know, all these different entities. And I support it.
Representative Maury, I don't know if you're trying to speak, but I think you're muted.
Okay. Jim Woodall, do you have any comments, or would you be supportive of a consensus resolution for this issue?
Yes, I'm absolutely supportive.
Senator Mohammed?
Absolutely, Representative Moore. I'm supportive. I just want to make sure one thing is that, like Mr. Woodall talked about, I think we need some sort of robust racial equity training. I know Tara brought up the video for jury selection process. I mean, I guess that's better than nothing, but I would think that especially our court stakeholders like our DAs, our probation officers, or judges, our public defenders, some sort of robust mandatory training for all of them. And for me, I think that training needs to be something that's consistent, like continuing legal education. But I mean, depends on where everybody else wants to start at.
Tara?
I'm absolutely supportive. I think that it would be worthwhile for us as a task group, a working group, to think through perhaps how we can frame this training so that the people that need it most are a bit more amenable to it. I think that a lot of times the people that really embrace racial equity training are not the worst actors that really need the training. And I just, you know, we, as John had said about the domestic violence, like you can only push people but so far, but these are things they need to talk about. And I just hope that we can think about ways in which it'll be a little bit more effective with people that need it the most.
Okay, then I think we all have a consensus, unanimous, that the work group 3 is endorsing and recommending a mandatory, robust racial equity training for all court officials, including the judges, the DAs, the public defenders, the juvenile justice system, probation, court staff, and also jury education, a component of jury education.
And I think we definitely want to include magistrates.
And magistrates, yes, thank you. All agree, say, or raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we have 7 minutes. That's great, really appreciate it.
Right, and so I think where we are, Marcia, is really talk about any next steps or our next meeting, what people would like to see.
Great, thank you. We have a lot to do. I think this is a great start to it. And I would love anyone's recommendation that what we tackle next, or a group of issues, bail or pretrial seems to come up, or overcriminalization and charging. Do y'all have a preference what we could really focus on the next meeting, which will be August 19th? And let me just bring up, after August 19th's meeting, we're supposed to prepare a report for the task force on August 28th. We may not get to more than 2 issues by our next meeting, have a partial report unless we add another meeting. And I think Justice Earls and Attorney General said we can add extra meetings. If we don't need to go there, we won't, but we have a lot to do. But I would suggest that we look at the bail and the pretrial, and if we can get to it, charging or overcriminalization, but take anyone's ideas if there's a better way or a better set of issues to address at our next meeting.
I think pretrial and bail are as important as anything.
Representative Moore, if I may. So one thing I'll say is I think as a community, I think a lot of folks have begun to recognize the need to reform our pretrial services and bail, which is obviously critical, and it's great that a lot of folks recognize it. But I think one of the most fundamental places where we can make true reforms without even legislative input is through, I mean, so glad to have Mr. Woodall here, but it's through our charging decisions with the prosecutors. I mean, a lot of our prosecutors can make so many reforms across the state tomorrow. And I would love to make that a fundamental priority. If we want to take up both, it's great at the next meeting, but I think that's a critical issue that our prosecutors can do immediately if we talk about these issues.
That sounds great to me. And maybe charging decisions are prior to bail pretrial. Would that be all right to start with the next meeting? Sarah, you okay? Ronnie, you okay with that?
Yes, yes. Yes, ma'am.
I'm seeing enough nods. I think we've got.
Would it be helpful to have anyone present? Jim, would you like to lead this discussion when we start off next time? Sorry.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
And Senator, you want to do the opposing presentation?
I mean, there's nothing to oppose. It's great to have Mr. Woodall here. I think it'd be great. I mean, I can share my personal experiences working with prosecutors, as I'm sure Representative Moore, you can, as our former district court judge. But again, I just can't emphasize enough. I mean, if we have great prosecutors across the state, a lot of these problems could have a significant impact across the board. So thank you. everyone.
Okay, so first up would be the prosecutorial issues, and then we will have a start at least with bail pretrial after that. Sound okay?
Just as a point of information on the bail pretrial issues, there is a group that's been working for about 3 years that has made a pretty detailed recommendation I think it may be on the SharePoint site, but if it's not, it's a recommendation with a supporting memorandum, and it's maybe not a full exposition of the issue. It may not be. As a working group, you may decide you want to go beyond what they've recommended, but it just seems to me there's some folks who've already done some work around these issues, and that you could benefit. Like you could circulate before your next meeting at least what they have proposed.
Can I ask Justice Earls, and I think I have those reports, and the Crime Commission was part of that. Would you recommend anyone present it? Or
no, I don't want to take away from your consensus already that you want to focus on charging. I was only suggesting that if you wanted to tee up the bail issue as potentially something you might get to, you may not get to it. You may need your whole time on the charging decisions discussion, but I was just suggesting you could jumpstart the bail and pretrial issues by circulating amongst yourselves the proposal that's already out there.
And just information that that rule and also a lot of the underlying ideas in that rule are in the idea bank, and I believe the rule is linked to there as well. I'll double check that part of it, but both sort of the idea of implementing the reform through Supreme Court rule as opposed to legislative means or other means is in the idea bank.
okay. Anyone have any thoughts, suggestions, comments about how this meeting went or what you would like to see at our next meeting on August 19th? I'll bring the food, okay?
I just wanted to say, and this is related to the pretrial, just as another point of information. So there was an effort legislatively this year to pass a requirement that all of the local jails provide access to much more comprehensive data on pretrial, who's in jail, how long, race, why. And it blew up because the Department of Information Technology has no ability to do that right now. There are 40 different software systems across the state that manage that data. Some are still in pen and paper, but we were able to get a study passed that would require local DIT to study what data is collected, which is, obviously a great stepping off point. And I spoke a few weeks ago with John Corellis, who is the director of DIT, and he was particularly interested in even expanding the scope of what they are researching and working with this task force to really utilize that legislative mandate to tee up real change. So that was a really positive discussion. I think it could be really helpful for any sort of pretrial reform.
Well, just one other note on that, the representatives from DIT are also on the data team. So we have a path to coordinate further on that as well.
It now says 5:30. I don't know if I'm the closer or someone else is, but I really appreciate all of this today and everyone's participation, and I thank you. So Jasmine or Ellen or Justice, someone else take it.
I think
thank you all. You all have been a part of a really great process today. And thank you all for sharing your ideas. And thank you, John, for being here and sharing your wisdom as well. I think that this is a promising for the move forward. So thanks everybody for being a part, and see you soon.
Bye.
Thank you.